My daughter who went missing 3 years ago just showed up on my doorstep. My wife and I had just sat down to dinner when we were interrupted first by the sound of the front doorknob twisting, then by 3 loud knocks. I stood up from the table and went to the front door, wondering who would have tried the knob first before knocking. My brother maybe, but it was a little late for a visit from him on a weeknight. The sound of the rainstorm outside grew as I opened the door. When I saw her standing on the porch, covered in rain and mud, my heart nearly leapt out of my chest. "Hi Daddy," Sarah said. The way her eyes and nose were scrunched up told me she was crying, even though the rain washed away her tears the second they fell from her eyes. "Can I come inside? It's so cold." I heard something glass shatter in the kitchen, then rushed footsteps. I grabbed my daughter in a tight embrace and began to sob. "Oh my God, you're home," I said. 3 years ago we had reported our daughter missing. We told the police that we had put her to bed one night, and the next morning she was gone. The police found that her bedroom window showed evidence of having been pried open. My wife, Hannah, and I hadn't heard anything that night, and the neighbors all agreed that they hadn't either. What happened next was the largest search party in our small town's history. It's not often 13-year-old girls go missing, especially under such terrible and mysterious circumstances. But despite everyone's best efforts and news reports throughout the state and neighboring states, there was no trace to be found of our little girl. I picked her up and carried her into the house while she sobbed into my neck. I heard my wife turn the corner, let out a small scream, then run to join us in our first complete family hug in 3 years. "What happened?" Hannah asked. "Did anyone follow you here?" "No," Sarah said through her sobs. "I don't know what happened. I just woke up in the dark and started trying to find my way home. I don't know where I was, somewhere in the desert I think, and I just started walking." I set her down and looked at her again. Her hair was long, it probably hadn't been cut since the night we lost her, and the clothes she wore looked like they had been given to her by a homeless person. "Let's get you a hot shower," my wife said. "Are you hungry?" Sarah sniffed and nodded. "Can I have a peanut butter sandwich?" "Anything," my wife said, now choking back tears of her own. "I can't believe you're back." We dressed her in some of Hannah's old clothes, which were still a little large for Sarah. I promised to go to the store first thing in the morning to buy a whole new wardrobe. The rest of the evening was spent with tears and laughter. Hannah and I couldn't believe she was back, and with no recollection of the time between the night she disappeared and when she woke up. Perhaps that much was for the best. After Sarah was asleep, we put her in the office with an air mattress and promises of a new mattress along with her new clothes. I sat outside on the patio with a glass of bourbon in one hand and a cigarette in the other. My wife came outside and softly closed the door behind her. We sat in silence for a moment, then she finally spoke. "What the hell do we do?" Her voice was low and shaky. I shook my head slowly and took a long drag from my cigarette. "I have no idea. Thank God she doesn't remember anything," Hannah said, taking a sip of the wine she'd brought with her. "You don't think she knows, do you?" "Shh," I said sharply, trying to keep my emotions a level, which was difficult because I was on the brink of panic myself. "We shouldn't talk about it." She took a sip of her wine and lowered her voice even more so it was just barely above the sound of crickets chirping in the grass. "You don't think she can hear us, do you?" "I don't think so," I answered slowly. "But I didn't think a lot of things before, and look at what happened." We sat again in silence for a long while, both reflecting on the night she disappeared and the lies we'd told to every police officer and news reporter that came our way. Keeping the lie straight had taken months of practice, but somehow we'd pulled it off. But that wasn't even the hard part. The hard part was keeping the whole plan away from Sarah. The year or so we'd spent planning the whole thing in secret, talking to the neighbors to get their cooperation, all while doing our best to keep the life-changing event as far out of our minds as possible. "She's bound to find out what we did," Hannah said. "We're not so good at keeping things away from her as we used to be." "It's just like riding a bike," I said, hoping more than anything I was right. The fact of the matter was that, 3 years ago, Hannah and I had committed the unforgivable act of filicide. We killed our own daughter, the very one that was now 3 years older and slept on an air mattress inside. If that wasn't bad enough, shortly after doing so, for good measure, we had moved across town to get a fresh start and, although we never said it out loud, even to each other, because we were still terrified even though she was gone, we were careful not to list our address on anything, no yellow pages, no direct mailing, nothing. And yet, Sarah still managed to find us. We hadn't wanted to do it. We spent years convincing ourselves that we were in control, that it was just a matter of good parenting. After what happened to the Jarvis boy though, we knew that for the sake of ourselves and everyone around us there was only one thing to do. I took another drag from my cigarette. I hadn't realized until that moment that my hand was shaking, and stared out at the night sky, trying not to think about everything that led up to that night, but being able to think of nothing else. Subscribe so you don't miss the rest of the story.